What up, gang? It's the Real Life Podcast, and it's your host, Daniel Allam. And today, we will realize what's going on with Jack Pfund. Jack,
I personally couldn't be happier to be here right now.
That's good.
I saw your ask for people. I said yes. You got the response quick, and I really felt honored.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I was trying to get you on last year, but we couldn't get you on. So
I enjoyed the podcast last year. I enjoyed the one where you were talking. I can't remember her name, but she was from Alaska.
Oh yeah,
I spent some time up there this summer, and that place is just wild. I strongly suggest everyone needs to go up there and
Alaska,
eat some salmon and hunt bears and stuff.
What's in Alaska besides salmon and bears? Like, what's good to do?
Well, you know this, but I'm from New Jersey, so the opposite of New Jersey is Alaska.
Okay.
Everyone is just on top of each other, and I remember the first day I got to Alaska, I saw there were in a town of 5,000 people, there were 20 weed stores, and there was a grocery store right by me that sold AR-15s.
Really?
Yeah. like bump stocks were fully illegal as a modification for weapons, and they sold them. At the same place you would buy chicken and eggs and milk. Yeah, and I was like, oh man, this is some crazy stuff. Right here.
Wow. And how long did you stay there for?
It was an internship for a month.
A month.
So yeah, I'm thinking about living back up there. They pay you to, and they'll get rid of all your student loans. That's a pro tip for anyone. I'm not paid by the state of Alaska, but they'll, if you're anything useful, not like a gender studies major, sorry, but if you if you're a nurse, doctor, or lawyer, they'll pay for all your student loans if you live up there for a bit. So definitely do it. Come hang out with me.
Yeah, sweet. And what type of internship?
It was at a district attorney's office where we did prosecutorial work.
Yeah.
I was able to watch 2 cases. One was pretty funny, where it was a drunk driving case where this guy had a dash cam video of him clearly talking to an officer after he had just drunk drove, and then he got on the stand, and they asked him, they're how many beers did you have? After he had said he was not guilty, but he got on the stand, and how many beers have you had, sir? And he had about 10 beers, everyone in the court started laughing, and his public defender, who was wearing sneakers, by the way, which that they clearly did not give him the best representation in the world. The man face palmed harder than I'd ever seen anyone in my life. So that was definitely something. It's different up there. It's like America, but a lot more cowboy, and fishing and mountains and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And so what exactly did you do in your work with law?
I wasn't legally allowed to do almost anything. I remember I thought because I'm still a college student, but
Sure.
I had to my first task was reorganize all their files and convert them from physical to digital copies. Found out that everyone up there drunk drives all the time. It wouldn't be you drunk drove once. I'd see the same person's name 8 different times in the system. Wow. Because clearly they're okay, I've done this 6 times and I'm not in prison or anything. I guess I'll just do it again. But yeah, I'm probably not making it sound amazing, but it's a pretty good spot. I definitely, yeah.
Okay.
If you like darkness, literal just dark all the time, half the year. But yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So law, you're into law. You're here getting a major. What's exactly is your major?
Government major.
Major.
I'm one of the only people that has a government major that doesn't have any minor or anything because didn't think to do that. But I did it, and now I'm going to law school. Don't know exactly where. It's down to basically about 2 places, one in Boston and the other in Charleston.
Okay.
And I have a legal background with my parents. They're both in the legal profession. My mom, she's the head prosecutor of or head of a department that specializes in sex crimes.
Wow.
Yeah. And in a pretty high crime county in New Jersey, so definitely a lot of really nasty stuff going on with that. I just remember her telling me about when I was super young. So I've just been around it forever. Basically detailed plots of Law and Order SVU, and I'm an 8-year-old because I'd be in the car, she gets a call from somebody, and she's just don't make any noise, but listen, don't listen, whatever. It's life, unfortunately. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, it makes me want to. That's what I want to do. I want to do exactly what she does.
Sex crimes.
Well, I don't want to do sex crimes, but I
You want to investigate?
let's not get that cut.
Yeah.
But I want to definitely. One of the cases I was working in Alaska. Was a man that unfortunately, like it was the most nasty thing I've ever seen, where he essentially molested his granddaughter, and she was like the only family he had left in the world.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that and like being so taken aback, because I initially went up there wanting to be a public defender, because like, you know, everyone reads like To Kill a Mockingbird in high school, and I thought like, you know, I'd be that guy. I'd be Atticus Finch, you know, like defending like some innocent man's freedom and something like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, instead, like I saw that most of what public defenders do, and this is what prosecutors told me, so they're a little biased, but from what I saw, it's either arguing about someone's blood alcohol content and saying it was that they actually weren't drunk when they, you know, hit like a lamppost or something, or, you know, doing nasty things. And basically, like, the legal defense for this firm was that, like, this, like, 11-year-old girl, like, was essentially asking for it.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, like, I could not imagine doing that and going home with myself, like, having to, like, be like, this is what I do every day. You know, like it's actually, it really was, like, kind of like a life-changing sort of thing for me to, like, see that. Because, like, you know, like, we live in, like, in my opinion, we live in, like, one of the most amazing countries in the world, but, like, so much nasty things happen, like, all the time, that, like, it really makes you, like, at least I wanted to be on, like, the good side of that. Like, I want to be helping and, like, assisting with, like, you know, not like low-level stuff, because obviously, like, a lot of people get arrested for things that, like, they shouldn't be. But in terms of, like, sex crimes, like, let's get some more of those people behind bars.
Yeah, sex crimes, man. It's sad reality. It's really sad reality. It's too much of it.
It's bad. Like, you know, like, I can only imagine, like, the things that, like, most people grow up with. Unfortunately, like, we try to, like, protect our kids. We try to protect them from, like, things that we believe could, like, do them harm and, like, you know, lead them down a dark path. But, like, a lot of people, the way they're raised, they aren't given that, and they're actually given, like, the exact opposite. And I remember, like, thinking, like, seeing a girl who's, like, case I was, like, witnessing, I was like, there's no, like, I don't know how your life can, like, go on after this, because, like, both her parents were, like, drug addicts. Like, you know, she had gone from, like, place to place. She eventually found, like, somewhere to be with, like, her grandfather, and it's just, like, clearly, like, not everyone can, like, go to the same places in life, because, like, you know, it's an impossible thing to, like, look at that person, that girl who's been through those things, and be like, okay, just, like, you know, work hard, go to college, and, like, eventually, and, like, she definitely could do it, but, like, it's a matter of, like, how that just, like, psychologically warps you from such, like, a young age.
For sure. No, I think it, like, takes you out of reality. You know, people just think it's so easy to just get back on your feet and go do normal things that normal people like experience, getting a job, going to school, whatever it is, you know. But it and I want to look into it more, but it's got crazy psychological effects, like you said. Like, I was in Baltimore this summer, actually, working, doing an internship that TD put me onto. It was called 1012 Sports. It was a Christian sports mentoring program, and I was in the heart of West Baltimore. And West Baltimore is, like, I think it's highest murder rate capita in the U.S.
I was just looking at, like, a chart or something, and like, it's top 15 in the world.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
that's insane. But yeah, I was living in the heart of West Baltimore. And, man, I saw a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's different than St. Mary's County, which is in southern Maryland. That's, like, countryside of Maryland, really nothing down there. So, but, yeah, saw a lot. Like, one time I remember coming back from church, actually. Me and the other intern, we had just, we went to church that morning, and we were getting back. We were just walking down the street, and there was, like, this house, right? There was, like, this, like, it was, like, an abandoned house. It was, like, a strip of houses. And it was an abandoned house, and there was some people in it. There was, like, these older women in it. There was, like, 3 elderly ladies in there, and they kind of just had these faces, like, they looked completely, like, soulless almost. And I was like
life had just beat them up.
Yeah, like, and I was looking, and I was, like, looking in, and then there was, like, just a whole, like, 10 younger guys, like, probably 30s, mid-30s, and they were just all standing there, and he was, like, grooming her, saying, like, just... like grooming her and telling her, like, you know, stay with me, all this stuff. But it was just like, I could tell, like, she was just in a state of just, like, there was just nothing there, you know. And it's like, that's the reality that some people live in.
You could just, like, look at someone's, like, face and, like, this just through the context clues, like looking at them for a second and like everything around them, like the house, the people, like you could just tell, like it's an insane situation, you know, like it's crazy to think of like the American city and how like not too long ago Baltimore, you know, like when my parents were young, Baltimore was like a pretty nice place to be. Like Newark, New Jersey, nice place to be. Patterson, New Jersey, which is where my mom works, nice place to be. And slowly, like over time, there has just been such like I don't even know how to describe it. Like the crime has taken over and made it so like if you live there, it is almost impossible to like resist the system that is like being put in front of you, and it destroys people. You know, like it is just an incredibly like bad thing to like, and clearly like our government hasn't helped. You know, like we haven't gotten into like the fact that like, you know, I don't know how like I guess we'll get into the controversial stuff now. Like the fact that like policing in this country has like really just kind of criminalized a lot of like people for like existing, and the fact that like a lot of these places have been like militarized, but like at the same time like not. Like I remember like reading a thing about how like Los Angeles in like the early 1920s, this was like a Washington Post article I want to say, was talking about how like one of the earliest methods of like systemic racism was actually they took back police and essentially let like crime go rampant because they didn't want to like put the resources into like protecting the area. And it's crazy how like now you see like these places where like I'll tell you, like Patterson, New Jersey, where my mom works, they just disbanded the entire police department, and the state just took over because the police department was like essentially like not working. Like it was not like the people that I'm willing to bet like the individual police officers worked very hard, but like in terms of like effectiveness, it just the institution didn't work, and you have to wonder like where does that go? Like at what point? Because like the city had been like a mess for a really long time, and just now the state had stepped in because I think it had one of the highest, like it's not a majorly large city, but in terms of like per capita murder rate, one of the highest in America.
Wow.
And
what, New Jersey?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Patterson, New Jersey specifically.
New Jersey.
And you know, you got to wonder like if this is because they're doing it now, obviously someone cares, but like it makes me wonder like how long they've like known about this and known it was an issue and kind of like kicked it down the road to like worry about like anything else.
I see. So what year did they completely just stop the police system?
For like Los Angeles or like what I was just talking about.
Yeah, what you were just explaining.
It was like the early, from what I remember correctly, it was like the 1920s, like early 1930s, when like Los Angeles was like suddenly becoming like big with like Hollywood, and like the redlining was like very clearly starting to be set, where like, you know, like Black and Hispanic and like Puerto Rican people were like living in like a certain area, and the white people were living in a different area, and they were essentially like, all right, the police are just gonna not worry about this certain aspect of it, and that I think, you know, obviously like it's a more complicated issue than to just say like one specific example, but I think like that was kind of the start of, you know, essentially like making the inequalities in America that like then became like reversed, where like then like the war on drugs started, and they were like, okay, clearly now that there's like crime to be had because there's been a lack of policing, now we're going to heavily you know, regulate these areas in a way that doesn't really help people, because, and frankly I've got an argument with this with people, but like I am of the opinion that like drugs shouldn't be something you're put in jail for if you're just using them. You should be helped. You should be like given counseling. You should be in certain instances probably forced to do rehab. But like I don't think it's like a helpful thing to anyone to criminalize people who are effectively victims of drug dealers. No, obviously like to hit the people who are like benefiting from that situation and put them in jail. No, but like I think the way it was handled with like specifically like the crack epidemic really negatively made our cities into essentially war zones that were like the popular culture didn't care. And it's a sad thing that like, you know, people now are kind of getting educated on this, but it's like it's one of those things where like you read about like the side of America that like, you know, like there's a clip of a Los Angeles police officer saying that he distributed crack, and I've never like exactly known my like exact thoughts on that because I've always heard of it as like a kind of conspiracy theory thing, but like, you know, like there was, he like said at like a meeting that like when he was working for the Los Angeles Police Department, he had oh my god, a police officer dealing crack cocaine.
Yes. There's a lot of messed up cops out there, bro.
Yeah, no,
I'm not sure we can find it, but yeah.
It's weird because like when people like don't want to talk about like making policing better, it kind of becomes like a political thing of like right and left, where it's like the police are effectively like something we all pay for. Sure. So like if it's not like working for everybody, it's like the roads. Like why wouldn't we want to like make them be as useful as possible in every situation, you know?
At the end of the day, we still need them. There's still, it's part of the way society functions, you know? You don't get, it's like the road, you don't get to point A to point B without the road, you know? Yeah. If the road's bad, you fix the road.
And I think like it's one of those things that like people on both sides kind of mess up.
Sure.
And
how so?
Like I remember during like the defund the police movement, I think people got that misconstrued and really missed the larger message, because when they were talking about like defunding the police, they were talking about like essentially like New York City had this like anti-crime unit, and they cut it, which is crazy because that's the anti-crime unit. I'm pretty sure isn't that what cops are? Cops the anti-crime unit, and along with that, it was during the pandemic, and I think since 2020, like murder in America has gone up like almost 40%.
Wow.
And to me, I always would tell people like I am supportive of the idea of like defunding the police, but like not in the sense that like we need there to be less police officers. I think we need to make the police officers enforcing better laws. You know, I don't think we need to like militarize and essentially make like all these different types of like crimes like legal. I'm not saying like obviously like, you know, make it a Wild West scenario where like anyone could do anything and do whatever, but like, you know, the idea that like we need to spend like a lot of our resources on like cracking down like essentially like what I was saying was like drugs, or like I was just reading a thing the other day of like this guy who was like handing out food to homeless people. And because he didn't have like the proper permits with like this, I think it was somewhere in North Carolina, the police like arrested him because you can't give out food to like, he had like a truck or something. Oh, and
he was giving it out to
for free to homeless people in like a park. And they essentially like were like, you can't do that. And to me, like, it's a matter of like you'll improve your standing with like a community if you allow that to happen, and if you stop like making people feel like anxious around cops because like they think they're going to be like arrested for something, like make it the only things people are arrested for is like crimes that like actually harm another human being, that actually like, you know, hurt someone and cause like a negative effect on society, and not like enforce any sort of like ideological idea of like, oh well, if you know these kids are smoking weed, then like eventually they're going to start doing crack, and then the crack goes to heroin, and then we have like crime everywhere. We're like, realistically, if you look at the rest of the world, it doesn't handle it like that. You know, people like we have such an insanely high prison population that like compared to like other like free countries is not seen.
Yeah.
Like you look at like totalitarian countries where like I'm talking like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, like where the laws are incredibly like they're even stricter, but people aren't getting as arrested. Because I think for a long time, what we confused militarization with like policing, or like the idea that like the two things had to be separate. Whereas like, you know, we just had the anniversary of the Waco Massacre. Are you aware of this? You ever heard of the Waco Massacre?
I have, but don't
did you watch that
know
documentary
much
on Netflix?
No, I never did.
That like, you know, like for like people who like would identify as like libertarian as myself, that's like the definition of like why people do not like laws to be passed. Like I remember, and this is slightly off topic, just something I remember during 2020 during the COVID debates. I don't remember his name, but like the Surgeon General at the time, he was like a young guy, and I remember him saying something about they're like, why haven't you like enforced like a national mask mandate? And which other countries have done, basically just means like there's masks everywhere. When you're outside, you need to be wearing a mask and doing that. And basically, I thought he had probably the best response to that I had ever heard. And clearly this guy wasn't a politician, so that's why he gave such a good response. And he said that, like, this is right after George Floyd was murdered. And he said, like, we don't want there to be more laws like that. We need to keep it, we'll keep it residential. And because, like, I got to figure out exactly how to word this because I'm paraphrasing here. But he said, we don't want there to be more enforced laws because that will create more situations like what happened with George Floyd, where there are more like interactions with cops where, like, if you're just walking out, you're walking your dog on the side of the road and a cop pulls up on you, he's like, wear a mask. And I remember thinking, like, that is kind of like the idea of like libertarianism in the law, where it's like we need to have less interactions with the state, like enforcing people to do things, and that will create less situations where people need to like they have negative interactions. And back what I was saying with Waco, like, you know, basically there was this compound, there was this large church slash living area in like the middle of nowhere, Texas.
Sure.
And it was this offshoot branch of Christianity called the Branch Davidians, where basically they were called a cult, and they did certain, like, I'll start with the bad things. They did, like, the leader of it was this guy named David Koresh. And that wasn't his real name, but he changed his name, David Koresh, which was, and basically he had an interpretation of the Bible. He was a really good speaker. And one of the big things he had was that he was able to explain, like, the book of Revelation really well, which obviously, like, you're a religious guy. This is like, there's a lot of Christianity discussion on this podcast. The book of Revelation is something that, like, a lot of people are, like, confused by, and there's a lot of interpretations of it. But, like, he had, like, a very specific interpretation where, like, people would say, like, when you watch this man talk about the Bible, it was unlike anything you had ever seen before. And he was, like, charismatic, but he was also, like, a pedophile. Like, he was a bad guy. And I hope I didn't make him sound too good just because he was not a good dude. He was the only person on the entire compound who was allowed to, like, have sex. Like, if you had a wife, that wife wasn't your wife anymore. If you went to the compound, it was David's wife.
Wow.
And, you know, eventually there was allegations of him doing things like that with minors, which is why he was a pedophile, which he was doing. But that's not what happened to make it essentially like an issue with the government. So these people, the Branch Davidians, what they would do to make money was they would go into the local town, they would go to the bar, and they would play music. Like, they were just like a band that, like, played for free, and then they were like, hey,
Christian music or like
just
any secular?
normal secular music. Like, and they were pretty good, and everyone knew them. They just kind of knew them as, like, these, like, Christian religious people out, you know, that live out there. It's Texas. It's a pretty, like, hands-off kind of culture. And they also would sell guns, and they would modify them, and they'd sell them. Again, it's like Texas. All of this was legal. But basically what had happened before that was that the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which is an offshoot of the FBI that specializes in those three things, they had ran into this situation in Idaho like about a year or so before. I might be wrong on the date, but it was just called Ruby Ridge, where this guy, he had sold a sawed-off shotgun to somebody, which, like, was technically illegal because you can't do that to a shotgun, but, like, you know, it's Idaho, like northern Idaho, like in the woods, like who cares,
sure,
right? Like if someone wants to buy a sawed-off shotgun, like if you didn't kill anyone, like I don't think anyone should matter. The ATF goes to the guy's house, and he was a little bit like a paranoid guy. I think there was like some sort of like altercation going on, and what eventually happens is that the ATF believes he's dangerous because he won't leave the house, and they know he has firearms. So they had a guy, like a sniper, and they shoot into the house thinking they had, like, sight on him, and they killed his son and his wife, who was holding their newborn daughter.
Whose son?
The guy who had sold the sawed-off shotgun, who they were trying to. So, and this became like a big thing. Like, he sued the government, got like a lot of money for it because, you know, they had just killed his family. Yeah. He actually got off the original gun charge because it was legal in Idaho at the time to do what he had done. And they were like, the ATF is like, we need better optics because this is bad. There are people, like, a lot of the political people at the time, like even like Democrats and Republicans, like wanted to get rid of their funding because they thought, like, okay, situations like this aren't good. So they go into Waco and they try to essentially not even with like they kind of knew the stuff that was going on with the kids, but they wanted to get them on something like very concrete that they could prove in court. So they were going to get them on the gun stuff. And this is something that they always point out, that they could have gotten David Koresh, because he was the only person they were going to charge with any crimes. When he was just jogging in the town, when he was just like, you know, going into a grocery store, they could have like brought him in and like done that. And instead, they rolled up to the house. And a big part of this people's ideology was that they believed like the end times were going to eventually come. Yeah. And they weren't like excited for that, you know, because like no one really wants the end times, but like that was part of the ideology. And they also were like pretty anti-government because of that. So then all of a sudden they get a tip off from like, because one of the ATF agents, like his truck breaks down, and like the mailman like sees him, helps him out, and he's like, oh yeah, there's about to be a raid on that like Branch Davidian thing. The mailman, who like knows them, because everyone in this town basically knew these people, tipped them off and told them about what was happening. And what starts because of that is a situation where the ATF rolls up in tanks, like military style, and that's what I was talking about, the difference between like policing and like militarization. This was not like policing. This is not like, you know, the local like cop showing up with like the badge on and like the hat. Like these were guys rolling up in like military equipment with like heavy like fully automatic weapons and like tanks. And they got there, and the Branch Davidians, because they knew this, had their own guns, and they had like a standoff. And like
with the military,
with the ATF. And David Koresh goes out there and he's like, we have women and children here, like I'll go. And no one knows exactly who shot first, but what the main theory that a lot of people live there is that they had like these dogs, and the dogs barked and like attacked one of the guys, and they shot the dogs, and because they heard a gunshot, people just started firing, and they started killing each other. And because like ATF agents had died, they essentially were like, all right, this can't be de-escalated, we have to stay here. So for about 3 months in like 1994, they like stayed there, and they blasted loud music. They eventually got like some of the people to come out, but what they eventually think they're going to do is they think, because it's like an end times cult, is how they phrased it, which like they kind of were, but like that's how they phrased it. Yeah. They're like, they think he's going to kill everybody. They think he's going to burn the place down.
Who, David Koresh?
Yes. So what they do is they got they were like, all right, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep negotiating, even though they already gotten like 60 people out. We are going to, they got permission to put like this gas into the compound. They like rolled a tank up, and instead of that tank having anything like ballistic come out of its like, you know, like it's a nozzle, it just blew this like neural gas into the compound. And what they believed was going to happen was they dropped off like gas masks that would help for this gas, which by the way, this gas has been banned by the Geneva Convention because it's literally like a nerve gas that like pretty similar to what we used in like World War I. And they knew that they knew this, like this came out like in like unclassified documents later, that the gas masks were too big for the children. So what they believed they were going to do, because they knew there was still like 30 kids in there, was that and they literally believed this. Like this is like proven like the
military.
Yeah, they knew this. They thought that because they couldn't cover the kids' faces, they were going to essentially just throw their kids outside. They were going to like somehow get them out there, and that was going to be a thing that gets the kids out, and eventually it will lead to activation of the whole building. The problem is, what the military didn't know is that everyone in the building had gone to the basement, and when the tank rolled up and like started blowing the gas, it knocked over the door, so everyone was stuck in there. And then this fire started that ignited, which like this was a very flammable gas, and it burned down everything.
With everybody in it.
Everyone in it.
Wow.
And what's even more crazy is that afterwards, and you can find this picture, I don't know exactly who, but like this ATF agent stood on the wreckage, like a couple of these guys stood on the wreckage with like all these people right after they had died. And it's one of those things that like when people are like, oh, the government wouldn't do X, Y, and Z, we should like trust them. We should do like, you know, like we should like not be like, yeah, see, like that's the compound with it burning right there.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's you didn't spell Koresh right. It's like Coresh. It's like with an O, not like Kirsch. But yeah, people like still cite this as like the reason why we shouldn't have like that type of law enforcement, and like like when people are like, oh, no one's coming for your guns, no one like wants to do anything, the government wouldn't do this, like you don't need guns to defend yourself, the government would do that. They cite this as like a main reason to think that that's unlikely. And there are like other, examples of it. Like there was that bombing of that I'm not as familiar with this, but there was like a bombing of this like black cultural center in Philadelphia on like the 80s at some point, because they believed there were like Marxist groups in there, and like they actually dropped bombs on top of it.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there were like other instances of like in West Virginia in the 60s, there were like these like striking coal miners where the government again came in and like started to like bomb them to get them to go back to work because they like were like striking for like unfair conditions. So like it's weird, like when you like, and I've been talking a lot, so I'll definitely let you go at a certain point, but like, we don't learn about these things in school.
Yeah.
And clearly, I mean, like, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, because everything I've said so far is true, but like, who's funding that? And like, why are we not learning about like, why did I have to like teach this to myself? And, and it's because of that people are less trusting in their government, because like I had to find out about this, all like the foreign policy stuff going on, like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, like what had happened in Vietnam, what had happened with like all these interpretations of like true events that happened that go essentially against the idea that like, oh, our government would never do this, or our government would never do that. And, you're reading it, and you're reading it exactly from like FBI records. It's not like some crack guy, like talking about it online. It's a literal like government document confirming this happened. And you're wondering like why can't they? Why isn't this more known?
Yeah.
Like it's just it's insane. It's I could go on like this forever, man.
No,
I was doing a lot of research before this, and
I think it all plays into a system, I think America is definitely, it's got lots of dirt, lots of dirt. And one of the ways they hide it up is through the school system, one of the, just, like you said, by the curriculum is set based on what certain events they want you to know. There's a lot of things on racism, on wars and military stuff that, like you said, people just don't know about.
I remember someone made a post, and it was like the most accurate thing I had seen, because it was like the way we were taught about like, black and white relations in school was like, America's founded, nothing bad happened with like any Native Americans or anything. It was all good. And then there was slavery, and, they teach you in school, like they were like, slavery's bad. And then slavery goes immediately to Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King was like, and Martin Luther King and his friends, they did nonviolent marches. We don't learn about Malcolm X. We don't learn about anyone else. We probably learn about like George Washington Carver and, Frederick Douglass, like a little bit, but like not, necessarily like the nasty things that happened to him, just that he was a slave that eventually became a lawyer. We get to Martin Luther King, and then they're like, all right, racism wrapped up. And then, everything's fine, and there's no like lasting legacies of anything, and like it's things like that make people just inherently distrustful of this country. Like it's why like I don't know if like you've seen the chart where people like they asked people about like all these various like ideas that used to be like incredibly important, and like about like in like 1998, like patriotism, religion, the idea in like the American dream. And they asked people like what percent of the American public like believes in those ideas, like from then to today, and all of those ideas have dropped off like to like a startling degree. Like patriotism dropped from like 75% of people would describe themselves as patriotic in like 1998 to like 30 now.
Wow.
And it's crazy because like all empires eventually fall, and people are wondering like, is this like are we getting to the point where like this country like is just getting too big, and we're watching like the fall of the Roman Empire. And clearly, like, I mean, I think that's a little dramatic in my personal view, but like it makes sense when you think about the fact that like almost everything has gotten like to an extent either like stagnated or like general like life quality has like gotten worse for people over like the past like 20 some odd years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. And so what do you think with your path that you're on right now in law, what do you think, how could you help this? How could you help what's going on in the world with specifically law? And
well, So like being a prosecutor, like you decide the crimes that you. Not a lot of people like realize this, like part of the legal system, but like prosecutors decide what crimes they want to prosecute. Okay. They look at the cases and they choose what to do. And I think like certain prosecutors have taken this too far. Where like, there was a situation in Chicago where, and I remember hearing about this and like it actually blew my mind. I looked it up and it was true. There was this like street where there was like a gang violence altercation where something like I don't want to give an exact number because I'll probably be wrong, but like dozens and dozens of rounds of ammunition were shot between 10 or so people.
Wow.
And the prosecutor decided to not prosecute it and called it they were mutual combatants, which the phrase mutual combatants is typically used for like, let's say me and you, like we just get mad at each other, we get in a fight. And it's like kind of unclear, like we were just, both being jerks and we got in a fight. The state wouldn't press charges on either of us because we mutually just like kind of wanted to fight each other. It wasn't like you punch me first or I punch you first. And in that situation, they had decided they were going to do that with people who had literally shot an insane amount of like bullets at each other. And to me, I think there's a line between that, and I think there's a line between people who like, think they're Judge Dredd and want to like prosecute every like moral infraction they think exists in society. And I think from the point of view of like, let kids have like lemonade stands and not shut them down for like not having business licenses. Let people, if someone wants to like do drugs and ruin their life and they're not like robbing anyone or hurting anybody, I don't think it's like the taxpayer's business to like put this person in jail just for them to get out and do it again. I think that if you want to like make America a better place, I think you got to like enforce it with the ideas of freedom that it initially came with, and not kind of like insert your own moral values into it. And I think the moral values that should be inserted are the basic ideas of like, don't hurt other people, don't steal from other people, don't commit fraud, don't do anything that will like bring down society. Sure. But like, don't take the idea of like not bringing down society as like, oh, well, like clearly we need to like prevent like every single minute fraction of like moral failing.
Sure. Interesting. So if that's the case, then like what, because basically the law is written on the Bible. So what are your takes on that? And like, I know, what's just your take on that?
I think, I am a Christian. I was raised like a Roman Catholic. I don't know if I necessarily would consider myself to be like believing in like Catholicism, but I do believe, Jesus is the Son of God. I do believe in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit and all that. I think that you get into a dangerous area of having a democracy versus having a theocracy. And you see with a lot of countries where they move into a certain direction of like enforcing like religious laws in a way that historically hasn't been implemented, and if it has been implemented, it has not improved the quality of life of people abroad. I think like when you look at like religious theocracies throughout the world, you see like a really clear example of like, for example, you see a clear example of people like using their interpretation and not necessarily like the most nuanced, complete understanding of these religious works as like the basis for law. Like in Afghanistan, it doesn't say anywhere in the Quran that women have to be fully covered at all times. But in Afghanistan, women have to be fully covered at all times. And clearly, like, I'm not a Quranic expert or anything, but like, if the fact that like it's the one country in the world where that's enforced, clearly they're just taking like one little nuanced part of that book and making it like a basis of society to essentially like ruins people's like freedom of choice to do things.
Yeah. And
to me, I see like when people like want to move America in more of the direction of like enforcing like specifically like Christian values, I think let's enforce Christian values in the sense of like personal freedom, personal responsibility, like the liberal values that have like made the Western world good. And made it like advanced in ways that it has been, and not necessarily worry about what people are doing in their free time that doesn't hurt other people, because at the end of the day, like those things, while like the argument against them was that they hurt society, I think the reaction to them can be even worse for society as a whole, because if you use the force of the government to say prevent two gay guys from like, getting married and having gay sex, the force of preventing that from happening in the first place will result in a worse scenario than if they had just done their business and people like left them alone and be like, all right, that's you.
But then, so how do you relate things to the Bible when that's one of the core value? That was one of the core values in the Bible. Is one of the things is that a man shall not lie with another man. So how, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you're saying we should maybe pick and choose, but then, so if that's the case, like, why even use the Bible? Because
obviously, like, the Bible is a great source of like morality for personal instances.
Sure.
But I think what comes about when you take things very literally, when a lot of these nuances from like ancient scripture, the understanding of them changes over time. And I think that, when it says like, I've heard different interpretations of what that specific line means. I have heard that it's like referencing like, I can't remember exactly who says that. I heard this in the class. I've taken like a couple of religious studies classes, that line specifically was not referencing like two consenting adult men, but like men who lie with like, children, like which was a very common thing at the time of antiquity.
Yeah.
And like specifically, like I think what morality should rest in is not in the law, but instead with people. And I think the thing about like when you tell me like you are going to use the law to enforce me from sinning, we could have different understandings of that idea. There are like Muslim majority cities in America where eating pork is wrong. Dearborn, Michigan is like 70% Muslim, and if they wanted to make a law that said like the bacon cannot be sold in this community whatsoever, no one can drink, no one can smoke cigarettes or anything, by the definition that you are presenting, they would have the right to do that. But wouldn't it be an understanding of like, okay, clearly like if we're all going to live together, we should have like a nuanced understanding of what morality is and what it means to different people?
Okay. Yeah, I think definitely very iffy topic, just because like it's like, okay, so how do you necessarily, like, there's a lot of people that just don't believe in the Bible, like, they don't believe anything 100%. About it. So it's like, but like you said, if you're looking at it like from this view of fairness, it's like, okay, so but why would you build a society off that if not everybody believes in the Bible? So is that like where
there's a part of it that's like that, but then there's another part of it that says like, historically, when you look at places that the most contemporary example is, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure like Saudi Arabia, you cannot change laws there, because the way laws work is that the clerics read the Quran and they basically like, all right, this is what it says literally, this is how it's going to be in Saudi Arabia. And I think when you just look at how that is getting implemented around the world, I think one of the advantages of Judeo-Christian societies is that we have had a more hands-off approach with that. And, there are certain things like where when people have freedom, they do things that are not necessarily correct in my eyes. And I think morally I wouldn't want to do it. But I think like as a Christian man, your role is to not necessarily like transform society in your image, but like transform your inner circle in your image. So have a family, have kids, raise them to be correct people. And I think the way we do that and the way we like advance like Christian notions in America is to make it so that people can have a family and they expand and eventually teach their children the correct ideas about what's right and wrong. And then they have kids, and that's how you just create a world where, people have a more cohesive understanding that doesn't require the force of the state to enforce it, Because if you're saying like, okay, we need to have a situation where like the rule of the Bible is enforced by like government agents coming to your house, then you run into what I said before with like Waco, where like you'll have like people who like, you know, the force of the state is used in ways that we can't necessarily like see in the moment of writing the law, but it always ends up happening because like this idea I've heard and I personally believe in is the fact that force breeds resentment in all situations. If you force someone to believe a certain thing or act a certain way and they don't want it, eventually they'll always be resentful of you. And you can see that with like the way COVID was handled. People in this country do not like to be told what to do. And, you know, like if you insert like more rules, it will only, in my opinion, push them away from this than bring them towards it.
I agree with that. I think, well, the majority of the history of the U.S. has been built off Christian nationalism, and we've seen what that's done. Like we see just all the history of, you know, like you said, racism, you know, and that's like one of the biggest things, and just wars after wars after wars. And like you said, it was because of this enforcement of these values. But then it's weird because from a theological sense, it's then it's from a Christian viewpoint, it's challenging because it's like, okay, I believe the Bible, like, you know, I believe the Bible to be the Word of God, you know, and that it's true and its whole nature. So it's like, if that's the case, though, how do I believe that to be true? But like, how does that get instilled into the law, into the world today, where it's not this thing where we're forcing people to necessarily, like, you know what I'm saying, abide if they don't want to be abide. So it's,
I think I get what you're saying, and I think my response to that would be like, the way, and this historically hasn't been the case, but a way a lot of people who would most fervently describe themselves as Christians reach the conclusion of becoming Christian is not often because anyone forced them to do so.
No, yeah, I definitely believe that.
And I do not believe it is the ideas itself need to be enforced on anyone, because I believe inherently it is a product, and obviously that's like just a simplification. I'm not saying it's a product, but like it is a thing people want. And I think people want a certain degree of like, you know, moral standing in their life. I think people want a relationship with God. I think people want to believe. Personally, I'm of the opinion that, like, you know, if there is no God, if there is nothing, if we just are born and then die and then it's nothing, then it is kind of hard to enforce the ideas of any sort of morality, because then nothing is real, and, you know, killing a person has the same moral weight in the world as like squashing an ant. And I personally don't agree with that. I think a lot of people, when they grapple with those issues, would come to the same conclusion. And I think, from my perspective, what you need to do in terms of like force the government is roll back the most evil things that we do. The most evil things that the government does. We need to, like, if we're talking strictly about enforcing the ideas of the Bible, let's stop bombing the Middle East. Let's stop torturing prisoners of war. Let's stop, you know, murdering our own citizens, and let's stop making it impossible economically for young people like you or me to have a family.
Sure. Because
realistically, you know, unless like you got like rich parents, or like you immediately hit it big with some like great job, which like not a lot of those necessarily, it is impossible. Not impossible, very unlikely, a lot harder than it was in previous generations, to have stable economic success. And without stable economic success, it's kind of hard to have the idea, because I like to think of myself as like, the more kids, the better. But if I can't provide a good life for those kids, it's going to be hard. And I think what we should do as a country is to not like go through the individual phrases and interpret them in one specific way and enforce that, but instead make it so that people can have a family, raise that family, treat that family with correct values, while at the same time, like, not being completely hands-off. I think there are certain things that, like, you know, in terms of, like, protecting children, that need to be handled 100%. But when it comes to, like, how we need to, like, make people religious again, I think we need to, politicians need to stop saying, oh, I'm a Christian, I do X, Y, and Z, while at the same time, like, in the next breath being like, okay, we're going to now bomb Syria, and if we accidentally hit a couple kids, you know, that's just how it works.
Sure. Yeah. So I think you're getting more at, it's like the interpretation of the Bible, that's what's messed us up. It's not necessarily that we've built, that our society is based on the Bible. It's that the way people have gone about in power, the way those people have gone about interpreting is what's blown society up.
100%. And I think a lot of our leaders don't believe in it in the same way you or I would. I don't think if you were the one who, you know, had the nuclear codes or had the enforcement of the United States Army, I don't think you would have destabilized Libya to the point where now it's essentially ran by terrorists and, like, you know, thousands of people have died. I don't think you would have invaded Iraq on this fake idea that everyone knew was fake about weapons of mass destruction. But I think you get people who, like, claim to be Christian, who love the idea of saying they're Christian because it helps them with, like, voting, and they'll do that, and then at the same time enact essentially war crimes that they should be in jail for. And to me, I think if you want to make the society more based on, you know, Abrahamic religious values, which I think, you know, obviously as a Christian, I am partial to Christianity, but I think any sort of religious values is helpful. If you want to do that, let's stop helping the most awful, nasty things that, you know, if Jesus was alive today and here and able to talk to us directly, he would say are reprehensible and need to be ended. Like to me, that is less Christian than, you know, two men loving each other.
Yeah, lots of hypocrisy. Definitely. Yeah, cool. And so I guess, how have you, so you said you grew up going to Roman Catholic Church?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Where was that at? Tell me.
North Jersey, Bergen County. Really nice church. You know, like, everyone involved in it. Like, I love the, you know, Father Ron. I knew this guy for my entire life. You know, I played CYO basketball at this church and, you know, wore the Our Lady of Mount Carmel across my chest. And I enjoyed that aspect of it, and I enjoy the community. And I think with Catholicism specifically, what denomination are you? I never asked you this.
Yeah, I grew up in a non-denominational church, yeah, but I started going to a Pentecostal church, and now I'm
moving in the non-denominational direction, okay. So I'm taking the opposite approach. But I think there's, in terms of, like, good and bad about Catholicism, I think there is a lot of beauty in the sense that you are doing something your ancestors did, and that there's, in terms of, like, architecture, like, you see certain, like, non-Catholic churches and it just kind of looks like a building.
Yeah. And
I like the idea that you're worshiping Jesus and you're worshiping God in, like, a building that's beautiful and, you know, represents some sort of, like, architecture that, like, exists within, like, the cultural standards of, like, your ancestors. I think that's nice. We're you know, obviously, like, I have, like, certain issues with, like, hierarchy, and I think, you know, when it comes to, like, Catholicism specifically, there's a lot of hierarchy, and I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I really found, like, the one branch of, like, Christianity that has, like, a government, like, has, like, various roles of people, and, like, you know, like, there can be orders from, like, top to bottom that come down, and people have to, like, listen to it. And I think that people argue, like, I've seen comment sections where people are arguing, like, specific, like, denominations about, like, oh, Protestantism and Lutheranism and, like, Catholicism, about, like, which is better. I think we're really wasting a lot of our time by, like, caring about that. Like, realistically, like, the book's the same for all of us. You know, if you're Mormon or something, that's different. You got a whole other one. But you know, like the book's the same for all of us, and I don't think we should care. And I think that's why it has moved me towards the direction of like a individual idea of like what being a Christian means to me, and not necessarily what it means to be a Catholic. Because at the end of the day, I'm a Christian before I'm a Catholic.
Amen. Yeah, I agree with that. Same book. Nowadays, it's like. It's so, because I think from an outside perspective looking in, somebody that wouldn't call themselves a Christian, it's like what is this? Like, you know, what is this? What is Christianity all about? You got everybody fighting over different denominations, and like you said, it's like we're just all over the place in some aspects. So it makes it hard from an outside perspective looking in to really just be like, you know, those guys, they know what they're doing, or like, you know, or just get people curious, I guess.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, go ahead.
What would you do? I'm gonna flip it on you. What would you do, or like what do you see as like the issues in society that are like preventing? Because I'll tell you, and I don't know if this is like a specific question you can just answer with like anything, but like that graph I mentioned about like religiosity, about like the values that used to define people, that number of like people who like identify as religious has gone down dramatically.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen to like amend to that, and what do you think needs to be done? Do you think there is like an overtly secularism in society? Like, do you think society should move more towards like America should be like known as like a Christian country, like within the interpretation of our laws? Like how do you see that?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question. But I guess I truly believe that to be a great nation, to be a nation that's fair, to be a nation that is not having all types of social injustices and murders and sex crimes and all this just filth and sin we see in the world today, I believe that God has to be in the center of that. And, you know, as a Christian, I believe the Bible, I believe Jesus Christ is God and he's the truth. So I believe everything must be centered around him. But I believe the people that are in power that throughout history have claimed to center their beliefs, center themselves around the Bible, we fall short, you know, and we've seen the reprimands of that. But do I think that because of that you shove that away? No, because I think that pushes us farther from the truth, because I believe that to be the truth. So I think it's me, myself, and I continuing as a Christian. Like, let's say I were to go down politics or were to go into law, it would be...
You're the senator of Maryland.
I'm the senator of Maryland, Daniel 2025 campaign. No, I'm playing. But I think it's just me continuing to center my life around the truth, center my life around my God, and allowing him to work through me to be able to reach the people, to be able to fix things, to be able to help people in bad situations and messed up situations. But at the end of the day, I have to stay within my God, you know, and I can't be branching out. And I think I think that's very important, because we fall short at the end of the day. We humans fall short, and we've seen that time and time again. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
It does. I understand that. Something I thought of that while you were saying that was like kind of like on brand with like what I was talking about previously, about how like people will like claim to be a certain like religious in our government, and then like our country does not act in that way. Was
Sure.
Before I came here, I was reading about, and it all, so it actually has a very interesting connotation with the beginning of the Vietnam War, because the thing that started the Vietnam War that like really escalated the divide between like North and South Vietnam was the 1963 coup d'etat that existed, that was U.S. backed. So basically, the North and South started to like just have different political ideologies take foot. Where like the South was capitalist and nationalistic, and the North was a communist, like starting to take hold of like socialism. And the president at the time, who I remember reading his name, I couldn't pronounce it, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it. He was a little more partial to the Northern cause, but he wasn't a communist. He was a what we would call now like a democratic socialist who was actually Catholic. And he was the first Catholic president ever in Vietnam's history. And there's, historically there are not many outwardly Christian leaders in Asia. And the U.S. government under the Kennedy administration overthrew him because they thought that he was partial to the Communist Party. And Kennedy, who was the first Catholic president in America, apparently it's always interesting reading about him because like apparently he didn't know anything about this, and from all indications that's true. It's just, as the president, I always find it hard to believe that he didn't know what was going on, but he apparently didn't know anything about it. And then like when he found out that the CIA essentially orchestrated a coup in Vietnam to get rid of the first Catholic president, he was very upset about that, interestingly enough, and he was shot 20 days later. So if you want to talk about like something where like, I always remember learning that JFK was our first Catholic president. Our country at the time did not reflect the values spoken in any sort of religious sense, because the religion that is perpetrated by members of our government is not Christianity, is not Islam. Even if you put like someone who like claims to be as religious as they can, like Mike Pence up there, at the end of the day, the religion they will worship is big government, is statism, is authoritarianism, because that's what people have done under the current system where they have so much power and they don't want to roll it back.
Yeah.
You got to find the person who will say like, who will actually claim that they want there to be less control from the government and let the people decide. And I think that's what you do in order to bring any sort of like morals back.
Yeah.
But like back in like what I was asking you, like what specifically do you think like needs to be done in terms of like changing laws, in terms of like policy? Like is there anything like you could think of that like, we're getting pretty controversial here. Like you could sound off.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something I'm still like doing a lot of research on, still like thinking about. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start. I think going back to what you were talking about, like with drugs, I want to talk about that and criminalizing people that do drugs. Is that
yeah, which by the way, if you had like a reaction to that where you were like, what is he talking about? Like he wants to like decriminalize all drugs. Everyone kind of reacts that way, like most people, so it's not that weird.
No,
but,
yeah. But my take on decriminalizing drugs, I think it should, and my mind may change, but I think it should be considered something you go to jail for. I think what you were saying earlier with like, obviously the dealer is in the wrong, because they're out here selling, like they should go to jail too. Yes, but I don't necessarily understand why. At the end of the day, it's a drug and it's ruining people's lives and killing people, So I think if you're having that and you're using that in your life and distributing it to other people, I believe that's something you should be going to jail for. Like I'm not sure. Like why do you think it's something you shouldn't be decriminalized?
Well, let me reiterate. Like I definitely do not think anyone who deals a drug to someone should in any way have that be a legal thing. I mean, depends on the drug. Like if someone's selling weed, I don't think it necessarily like needs to be like the priority of the state to like make that person like go to jail. But I think if you are dealing drugs to someone that can ruin their life and you're doing it solely for a monetary benefit, that is morally reprehensible and a criminal act, and you should go to jail. But what I meant when I say decriminalizing drugs, and the vocabulary there is important, because if I were to say legalize, if I was like legalize cocaine, then you could buy cocaine in a store. That's not what I want. I don't think that benefits society, and I think it actually denigrates it to a pretty serious degree. But what the people who get it, the people who use drugs in a way that is unhealthy for them, they are victims of that. And granted, if you are hurting people in order to enforce your habit, that is a crime. And that is definitely something that you should be held liable for. But if your only crime is hurting your own body, and, it's actually an interesting thing. There is a professor at Columbia who is a recreational heroin user. He only snorts it, which I don't know anything about heroin, but he doesn't shoot it, and apparently snorting it is healthier. And he is a professor at Columbia, and he was a very straight-laced guy. I guess just somehow he tried it, and now he just does it occasionally. It's how he relaxes. And if one of my friends told me this is clearly he's a very intelligent human being, he's a professor at an Ivy League school, but if one of my friends told me they were a recreational user or a casual user of heroin, I'd be like, really? I don't think you have it in you to stop. But what is it? What is the point of my tax dollars to take that guy and put him behind bars? Yeah. I can understand. I think the only things, the victimless crimes, any crime that doesn't have a victim besides the individual, I don't see them as being something that should be enforced.
Yeah. But I don't see why. Why do you see? I do agree. I believe some people, a lot of people that get hooked onto drugs or drugs get introduced into their lives is because a lot of them it was from a powerless position. It was from a victim's position. But I think at the end of the day, if you are still continuing to use, still continuing to live this lifestyle doing drugs, and ruining your own life, I don't see how. And I believe, first of all, I believe our prison systems are very messed up, But I still think there needs to be something to where they can take you out of your reality on the streets in the world because you're not doing it right here. I believe they need to take you out of that reality and somehow create an environment that you are away from the things that are destroying your own life. Because I think that that professor that's doing heroin recreationally, he's ruining his life. He's ruining people's lives around him. We say people do what they want to do, and it's not going to hurt anybody else.
Pull him up. I'm telling you.
Really, what's his name?
Just look up Columbia professor, casual heroin user. I don't remember this guy's name.
This is crazy.
And he's definitely hurting his health. There is definitely no way to be using heroin where it's not hurting your health. Yeah, see, this is that's him. He's been on talk shows, and if you look at him, that's not an unhealthy looking guy. That you wouldn't look at him and immediately pick him out as a heroin user, by any tricks of the imagination. And he's also a professor of psychology. So, of anyone, I think he's very aware of how the brain works and the effects it's having on his brain.
Sure.
I think he's just choosing in his head. He's like, all right, I know the risks. I know what's happening. And, clearly he doesn't need to steal anything to support this habit. He gets a paycheck. Why is this guy any sort of threat to society?
I think because still at the end of the day, first of all, he's ruining his own life. I feel like he is physically ruining his own life with the effects that what heroin does to you. But also, he's pushing this reality that it's okay to be unsober-minded. It's okay to be under the influence. But when we look out throughout history, we see people who aren't sober minded, the rates of suicide, the rates of murders, crimes, sex crimes, like all that stuff goes up. Why? Because it you're not the same. You're not yourself. You do things. You're more easily to anger. You do things out of rage and selfishness, and you kind of distance yourself from everybody else. And so yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, he's doing it in his own little bubble, but at the end of the day, it still has effect on everybody else around him and people that are viewing this. So
I understand that idea. Yeah. It's the idea of like, you know, that you know, the philosophy of that has kind of like been pervaded throughout centuries in terms of like, if we stop drug use and or alternatively we opened it up and allowed it to happen, it would create all these other issues with crime that would come and hurt other people. But my response to that type of thinking would be, and specifically the part where you said like he's hurting himself and like we should do something about that, is the idea that like there are many legal ways in society that someone can hurt themselves and we don't do anything. I like personally, I and I'm going to really reiterate this because like, you know, law school and stuff, drugs are bad. No one should ever do drugs. Reprehensible thing. But cheating on a significant other, I think, leads you down a darker path and gives you a darker bit of psychology than like someone who like was stupid in college and like did cocaine once. Are we going to start enforcing laws on people who cheat on their significant other? And certain places do that. Certain countries, like Muslim majority countries, do that. And I've even seen people in America support the idea that like adultery should be like a crime. But I kind of think the cat's out of the bag with that, and it's kind of hard to like, you know, get it back in. Yeah. And I think why exactly are we? And if you think about like the role of like why we are criminalizing drugs, it is not for reasons that you would be led to believe. There is a quote that basically, so you know how Nixon taped everything? Like every like he was like a paranoid guy, and like there was always like microphones in the Oval Office.
I haven't heard of that.
So that's why we have Watergate, because there were microphones everywhere in the Oval Office, and he taped everything because he thought everyone was like out to get him. And because of that, we have like a very unique view into why like certain thoughts. And you could look this up. I don't know exactly what you would look up, but there was a quote where he said like one of his advisors said like the reason why they criminalized heroin and marijuana specifically was because their main political opponents at the time were black people and hippies. And they said that if you criminalize those things, you can legally disrupt the meetings, because in their eyes, the way they saw it was that hippies smoke weed and that black people do heroin. And if you do that and essentially say like, okay, like give the police a reason, like, okay, like disrupt this meeting because they're smoking weed or doing heroin, that gives them the opportunity to disrupt them and weaken their influence in society. Yeah, look up like, and then like at the end of the day, like at the end of the quote, he says something along the lines of, "Did we know the war on drugs was built on like false promises? Of course we did." And like it's the things like that like make me see like why it's happening. And I can understand why someone would believe what you believe, where it's like we need to like drugs are bad, they ruin lives, which they absolutely do, and we need to have less of it, which I totally agree with. And I think there are ways that don't involve putting people in jail to like prevent that from happening. But the reason why these were put in the first place was not to benefit you or me.
Yeah.
It was to actively exert control over people in ways that were clearly very racist. Sure. And clearly just morally wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's such, there's so like you said, there's so many things that things are wrong, but like you said, we don't have laws enforcing every single thing, and this is why I think like we humans, the human race is just so broken. We're in such pieces that I don't think no amount of laws on this earth, no amount of government policies will stop us from doing what we want to do, like you said, because the more on this earth that you enforce, that you say do this, do that, the more people rebel, because of our nature. So, and like at the end of the day, like you said, yeah, I don't believe there's any amount of governmental laws that you can enforce that will change people. I think at the end of the day, and you have to have an experience like with God. I truly believe that you have to have an experience with God, and you have to come to know him and see him work in your own life, because I don't see, like, how does somebody have a change of heart? How does somebody want to stop doing what you can throw them in the jail, sure, but does that change their heart? Does that change their mind that, oh, killing this person was wrong, raping this person? No, you can tell them till they're blue in the face that what you did was wrong. You're going to sit in this jail cell forever and rot. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change somebody's heart. That doesn't change somebody's mind. So I think at the end of the day, you always need God in the picture. You always need Jesus in the center of everything, because without that, there's no change.
Eric Adams, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York?
No.
He's a Democrat, and which is why it was pretty strange that he said this, because typically, like, Democrats are the people who are really big on the separation of church and state. But he was at some sort of church making a speech, and he said a line where he said, I don't want to butcher this exactly. Maybe you could, like, pull this up, like Eric Adams, like, separation of church and state quote. But he said something along the lines of, like, you cannot separate the church and the state because the state is the body, but the church is the soul. And again, from like a practical, like legally based perspective, I don't see a lot of added benefit from like adding morality specifically because like it's in the Bible without addressing the root causes of why people do things that are bad and not in the Bible first. But I think when you phrase it like we can't have a society that doesn't run on some sort of morality, and I think when you let people just like run rampant, and there's a certain point where it goes too far.
Yeah, lawlessness.
Yeah. See, that's the quote right there. You take the heart out of the body dies. I can't separate my belief because I'm an elected official.
Sure, but
yeah, and it's reminding me of like it's something I can speak to that I saw where obviously everything I'm saying is like pretty like anti like legal, like anti like enforcing new rules, anti like government force, pro like letting people make choices. But one thing I saw that made me really repulsed was I visited my girlfriend who was studying abroad in Europe, and we went to Amsterdam for a weekend. And obviously Amsterdam has like a very like libertarian-esque view, like people can like smoke weed in the like streets and like the red light district. You heard of this?
No.
Prostitution is openly legal in Amsterdam, and the legal reasoning for it is that people are going to do it. We should make it so that it can be regulated and everyone is like forced. That's the basis for what happens. But what I saw with my own eyes, and I was going into that with the perspective like, it's a bad thing. People shouldn't do it, but like at least like we aren't putting more people in jail because of a consenting act. What I saw was a really disgusting like perversion of like the human body. Like the way the system works is that you have a street, and on the street there are a bunch of doors facing out onto the street, and the doors have red neon lights surrounding them, and in the doors are prostitutes like waving out, pointing at you. And the way you purchase them is you walk up, you negotiate a price, there's a bed in there, and you have sex. And I saw it, and I was genuinely so disturbed at the idea that they had like the way the system had worked is that if we're going to make this like a legal and regulated thing, is that we're going to make like a woman vending machine. And that's how it worked. And then you later find out, which me and my girlfriend, we like to research on this. We found out that a lot of those women, most of them are not from the Netherlands. and in fact, like a decent amount of them, and they've tried to like cut down on this, are actually trafficked. They're actually there against their will, and they're sending money back home, but like not a lot, and a lot of it's being taken from them. And it's things like that where like obviously I've pushed a certain idea of like let people do what they want, if it doesn't hurt anybody, but like that is the type of thing that just breaks society. Like that is the type of thing that just rots it from the core and makes it incredibly untenable to live in. And then I juxtaposed that when the other city I saw in Europe, which was Copenhagen, where everywhere I went, I saw children. I saw families of children because, they handled their economic system there where like it is very easy to have a family. And to me, I looked at it as like there is a way to have a society where people are free and they're not necessarily like thinking of the rule of like the law is not imported directly from God, but it can be a wholesome society that allows for Christian values to exist. And that's what I saw in Copenhagen. And in my eyes, more families, more kids, better society could be. Crazy tangent I just went on, but yeah.
That was interesting. So at the end of the day, and we can end on this, but you think that with law and Christianity, you think that at the end of the day, the law should have some Christian values present that exist in it, but it shouldn't be necessarily all based from.
I could see why you're coming from that conclusion, because I've been kind of all over the place. But if I had to put it in like a thesis statement, it would be roll back the state, and in that rollback, handle the things that are most evil first. And if we want to enforce Christianity, do not do it in a way where we are forcing it onto people, but instead allowing them to have the opportunity to have a normal life so that Christianity can enter naturally. And then I believe that's how you build a society where, I keep talking about like having a family, having kids, but if you don't have a good family structure, then you don't have a good society. And I think that the ability to do that needs to be assisted by the government and not actively hurt against, and realistically, we can make a more religious society without building statues of the Ten Commandments outside the courthouse, while also not addressing the fact that there is a rampant homeless population. I say, let people believe whatever religion they want, because in America we have a multi-religious society, and it's difficult. It would be impossible to like change that. And instead, let's make it so people can exist in a way that the American dream is a realistic concept, and then religion comes in that way. I don't know if I just repeated myself. I thought I had a pretty good one, and I just kept going, but yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Cool. Yeah, and I think my biggest take home is that just with law and Christianity, it's just at the end of the day, I think you're not trying to make people be religious. You're not trying to make people come under all these laws, because that's the whole point of Christianity. I feel like it's to experience freedom within Jesus, to experience freedom within the power of God. But I think, and if we equate that to what you're saying, that goes on just in a worldly sense, like no amount of law is going to make is not going to bring about freedom. You know what I'm saying? People are going to be more rebellious, Yes. So I think if kind of looking at it from a different perspective, it's the same thing with Christianity. I think we're not coming to enforce religion. We're coming to show Jesus and show his love and show, and just living that out and allowing people to open up to that, because like you said, nobody comes to get to know God by enforced this or that.
100%. And the people who do end up resenting it.
Yeah. Sweet.
Sweet.
Well, Jack, it was fun having you on.
I couldn't have been happier.
That's hard discussions.
This setup is awesome, and I can't wait to see what you do with the show, man.
No,
really.
For sure. Sweet. Well, hey, that's all for today. I appreciate you guys tuning in. God bless you. You want to shout out your stuff?
I didn't know I needed to do a shout out, but I love you, Mel. Shout out to TD. He's the one that got me into the podcasting game. Yeah. And shout out Coach Q. Hopefully you watch this. I'll have it on my Instagram story, so hopefully you see this and you'll remember this shout out.
Sweet. Alrighty. God bless you guys.